On Monday evening, while we were squabbling around in the dirt of the BBC nonsense, the House of Commons was debating the Privileges Committee report, and there were a number of extraordinary comments, mostly attacking the Privileges Committee, but Jacob Rees-Mogg, Michael Fabricant, Priti Patel, all objecting really to finding themselves in the firing line and being criticised. And there were also tweets from Lord Goldsmith that were read out. But it was Laura Ferris, who is a Conservative MP, who really held the day. I'm going to play you some of her speech because it is simply astonishing. She starts by praising Harriet Harman, a Labour MP, the mother of the House, and she goes on to excoriate, eviscerate, to crucify Goldsmith for the most appalling behaviour, which continues. And I think I think it's an emotional and extraordinarily valuable speech that tells us that shows us really how politics should be conducted in an age before sloganising, how politics stretches across the party divides to recognise the common bonds that tie politicians together. And what was so touching was the line that 14 weeks before she took up the appointment as the committee chair, Harriet Harman's husband of 40 years, Jack, died. And against this background, she says, I invite members of the House to consider what's more likely, that she agreed to chair the committee as a final act of service to this House, or that she did so because she was interested in pursuing a personal vendetta against Boris Johnson. Listen to what she's got to say.
I have said nothing on this matter until today, and I haven't really considered I had a right to do so because I was only a member of the Privileges Committee for a brief time, and I was formally replaced by my honourable friend, the member for Broxbourne, who's now in his place, in September 2022, before the substance of the investigation into Boris Johnson began. But I do want to highlight some of the comments that were made during the period when I was a member of the committee, and I feel impelled to do so because I consider that the issues go to the heart of how we choose to regulate ourselves as members of Parliament, and the treatment we are willing to tolerate of those members who put themselves forward to assist in the proper functioning of this House. And as the report points out, the work of the Privileges Committee is crucial to democracy because the functioning of Parliament and the way that we discharge our obligations to those that we represent depends on ministers being truthful about what they say at the dispatch box. I became a member of the committee on or around April 2022. I was asked to do so by the party whips, by the member for Tamworth, who was the Deputy Chief Whip at the time. I'd expressed no interest in joining the committee, and I don't say that to be critical. It's just a fact. It's not something I'd previously considered or wanted to do. And I know that the same applies to the member for Peckham in Camberwell. She was asked by her party whips, following the recusal of the committee's chair, the member for Rhondda. The chair had to be a Labour MP. That was part of the standing order, and it had to be somebody of sufficient seniority, so the mother of the House was an obvious candidate for that. I know that she'd expressed no previous interest, but she accepted their request. And I want to make clear I'm mounting no criticism of either side's party whips. They play a very important role in the smooth operation of Parliament, and it was incumbent upon them to find members for this difficult and sensitive task. The mother of the House's appointment was not just the choice of the opposition whips. It was approved by the whips on our side. I remember the discussion about it. And I know that the mother of the House drew attention to the tweet that she'd written to our whips. And again, it was approved. And ultimately, both of our memberships were approved by the whole House because it passed without division. I do want to say, on behalf of the mother of the House, just to contextualise her appointment, the member for Camberwell and Peckham had already announced her intention to retire from Parliament at the next election. A parliamentary career that has spanned 5 decades and has been defined, probably more than any other person who's ever sat in this House, by her commitment to the advancement of women's rights. 14 weeks after she took up, 14 weeks before she took up that appointment, her husband of 40 years, Jack, had died. Against this background, I invite members of the House to consider what is more likely, that she agreed to chair the committee as a final act of service to this House, or that she did so because she was interested in pursuing a personal vendetta against Boris Johnson.
Yeah.
I want to make reference to 3 tweets that were written by Lord Goldsmith of Richmond Park. He's named in the report, and I've given notice to his office that I intend to do so. 2 whilst I was a member of the committee on the 23rd of July and the 7th of August 2022, and one that is a retweet that's referred to in the report from the 9th of June. The 2 first were written at a time when the committee had done no substantive work. The only thing that it had done was make a request for disclosure to number 10 Downing Street. He wrote, "The Partygate probe is clearly rigged. It's a jury comprised of highly partisan, vengeful and vindictive MPs, nearly all of whom are on the record viciously attacking the person they are judging. It is an obscene abuse of power." Another said, "Anyone who has any experience of MPs knows you cannot trust them to judge their peers, except through the lens of their own ambition and prejudice. It is why we have a system that is so open to corruption." It is, Mr. Deputy Speaker, completely unacceptable to allege or insinuate that members of the Privileges Committee are corrupt, or that the inquiry was somehow rigged. The report uses the nomenclature of contempt, but I think with the word corrupt you could also make an argument that it's libellous. It has been repeatedly overlooked that a number of the Conservative members of this committee, including the member for Warrington South, the member for South Leicestershire and the member for Harwich and North Essex, had already undertaken an inquiry into Boris Johnson in July 2021, a completely separate matter. They had been asked to consider whether his holiday mystique had been properly declared. They could have found against him, but in fact they found in his favour. So there was no principled reason for Lord Goldsmith's attack, no empirical basis for contending that the committee could not have found in his favour, because on a previous occasion it already had. At all times, it would have been open to members of this House to vote against the committee's final conclusions had they disagreed. I can't avoid the conclusion that the tweets were designed to pressurise the members of the committee and undermine their work. And I say that as somebody, as I say, I didn't hear the investigation, the inquiry into Boris Johnson in the end. But, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I do think that conduct manifestly fell below the standard that was acceptable for any member of the upper house, let alone a minister of His Majesty's government. And I hope you'll forgive me if I add that I did find the environmental pretext that was advanced to justify his resignation somewhat unconvincing in circumstances when his nose had clearly been put out of joint after he was asked only hours earlier to apologise.